an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering of Dawn and Darkness. See Book 2, Chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4. In these chapters, well, we are back here with Calder Martin. I had kind of forgotten that we were going to pick right up with Maya getting out of her bonds. And honestly, I love so much how weird the interactions between her and Bliss and the rest of the crew are. I've missed these guys. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to George for commissioning this episode. George is here in the chat. Yes, George is saying it was so nice that you got to finish one and then start a new one. Amen. This is like my sort of consolation prize right now because Dread God just came out and my husband just finished it and just keeps rubbing in my face that it was really good. And so I'm like, you know what? Yeah, well, I'm reading other Will White stuff that's very good, and you're not, so take that. But these opening chapters, it's very interesting because we spend more time with Jyrene, and we are with her in the past, and what I think is sort of appealing to me about the Calder books over the Shara books is that when we go back in time, we go back into somebody else's POV sometimes. This isn't the first time that we've been with Jyrene, for example. And usually when we're going back, we're still with Shara. And in the present, we can occasionally be in somebody else's POV. We've gotten quite a few Lucan POVs this past book. Before that, we even had some Carrion POVs. Actually, there was a Carrion POV in this book too, but we're in POVs with them a lot of the time regarding shit that Shara is already involved in. Do you know what I mean? With Lucan having his own POV, he was sent on a separate mission. So that was one time where it had nothing to do with her, but it still did relate. And what's going on with Jyrene is only about Jyrene right now. And I think that's what I find sort of I find it really like compelling to see the angle of this weird organization, this cult, and how her beliefs in that are going to be carried forward and expressed now that she is an adult. Because we know that she kills Lucan, and we know that she still believes in what she's, been trained to believe in, basically. It's a weird way to say it, but, like, that's what's going on with any religion that you're, like, raised in, really. So, due to that, because she has been sort of, like, had split loyalties, I guess is the way to say that, this whole time, I still don't feel like I know what she's going to do. And I still don't really feel like I understand their game here. I'm not sure they even understand their game. So there's an unpredictability to her that I find really engaging and compelling. As much as she annoys the shit out of me, which I really should, like, make that clear. As much as I like Jyrene's POVs, I am not Team Jyrene at all. But she's really interesting to read about. And I feel like that's something that Will White's really good at, is making a character that you find fascinating and want to know more about, even if you don't really like them. There are so many characters in Cradle that are awful people, or just people that are frustrating, even if they're not bad people. And yet I'm still like, oh, but I really want to know what happened there, you know? And then if they die, it's just actually sad. George says he should not be allowed to read it before you, LOL. I agree. Thank you, George. You got him into it. That's so not fair. Coming back to this series really has me appreciating Jyrene as a character. Yeah, I think that, the first book, not fully appreciating what it was she was involved with from the start, you know that she's on something shady. You know that he is being conned from the moment that he meets her, basically. But it's still very different to now in this book. We're starting off with a lot more information about where she stands and what she's doing. So anyway, we start with chapter 1, 20 years ago. And I love the pieces of like quotations that he opens chapters with, because it will always hint at what's coming, but it will do so in a way that does not feel like it's spoiling anything or ruining something. It feels more like the overall commentary of the vibe we're about to experience. And like the Shara chapter where she becomes Guildhead, it's mentioned that, becoming soulbound to certain really important artifacts can lead to you having positions of power in the guild. It's foreshadowed. And here it opens with, elder cults find their recruits in the ways you would expect, through bribery, misinformation, brainwashing, preying on the emotionally weak, and exploiting the uneducated. I am going to refrain from the comment I want to make right now. But, kids, I'm sure you know what I want to say. But we've discovered a few cult members, a small handful, who truly believe that the elders will somehow save us. From the Navigators Guild report on sleepless activity in the Aeon Sea. So, that's the community that she is part of. They really believe it. And reminder, as much as I totally understand Shara's conclusion that she's an idiot for believing in this, after seeing the way that people can be bound to dangerous objects and really become one of the few things standing between entire groups of people and elder spawn, I can understand and when I'm saying that, I'm talking about the regions, obviously, that we meet in the beginning of the last book, but I can understand thinking there is a way to incorporate some of what they have to offer to help our situation. And I could really see how tempting it would be to, as just a psychological thing, when something feels overwhelming, insurmountable, and completely out of your control, our instincts as human beings are to try to make sense of it, to study it, to begin to find patterns and things that are predictable within it so that we feel we've got any power in the situation. And we will go so far as to invent shit to make it seem like we have power over things that are completely out of our control, because it makes us feel better. It makes us feel less vulnerable. So I think that's a big factor here. But also, when elders are capable of the kinds of things that we have seen, and you know that what they're doing is somehow possible, the temptation to be like, well, maybe it's possible for us too then, it's understandable, just feels really misguided, and it feels like the kind of thing that basically the question becomes, at what cost? And they don't seem to think the sacrifice of a few people is a problem if it's for the good of continuing humanity. And they just keep on sort of, from what we're seeing, putting that price down to justifiable. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting a spam call. I meant to put my phone on do not disturb and I forgot. So anyway, okay. We are in this weird little town, and there is so much gold here. They are weighing down their fishing nets with it, using it as anchors. There are golden rocks in the street that the kids are chucking at one another. A woman is sweeping gold flakes out of her doorway. So when you hear these tales about cities paved with streets of gold, this is like a literal place where that's happening. And it's not a rich place. It is like, when I say that, I mean, this isn't some magnificent city. It's described as like a ramshackle pile where all of these different buildings are built on top of one another when they fall down. And I'm going to read this part here. Each building had been cobbled together from driftwood and parts scavenged from shipwrecks. So Jyrene and her father walked between walls of warped wood and crusty ropes. Many of the houses had collapsed or sunk down into the earth, but someone else just built another one on top of the pile. The result was an entire town that looked more like a model built by a little boy out of scraps he gathered in his backyard. I was listening to a podcast recently about the gold rush in California. And part of me is wondering if that's like a bit of what he's drawing from here because of the gold aspect. But the gold rush in California resulted in such a densely packed harbor, San Francisco Bay, that there would be ships that went down either by accident or because sometimes somebody would pull into harbor, be like, all right, now I'm done. They didn't want to deal with crewing or selling their ship because there weren't enough men to crew things at the time. So it was really hard. That's what Shanghaiing was, when they would capture people, drug them, and then basically they'd wake up in the middle of the sea like, hey, you're a sailor now. So these guys would ditch their ships, let them sink in the harbor, and then eventually they would begin to build over them. And they would even dump garbage and fill in the spaces between ships that were sort of sticking up out of the water and create a landmass. So there are whole sections that are right on the edges of the bay out there that weren't there 100 years ago. And they made like some public transit areas where they had to tunnel, and they fucking tunneled through some shipwrecks that were, and they have like camera footage of the shipwrecks that are underground but still like intact, that they are passing through with construction crews. It's wild. So anyway, I thought that was fascinating. I had no idea. And this really, really reminds me of that whole like setup. And it's really clear that what's going on here is some sort of weird link between these people and the elders. And it's not really like necessarily directly to a great elder, but they've clearly got some stuff going on here, experimentation, or I don't even know what one calls it when you bond with one, because we've sort of seen that can happen. But the people that they run into, some of them have webbed fingers. The children have eyes that reflect light back like cat's eyes do, and they turn like that bright red, or raccoons, that kind of thing. And this dude that they wind up dealing with later has this lump under his like shawl that moves around, and clearly to me there's like a creature under there. And Jyrene, I don't even know what to do with this girl. Jyrene takes everything in such stride, and some of it is that she doesn't understand what's going on. But I really feel, based on what we see of her behavior in the vision, she would really have rolled with it anyway, even if she did know. I don't know. I just get the feeling from her. She isn't flappable in the ways that I would expect from somebody her age. And even though she can admit something is like repellent or hideous, she's also really able to compartmentalize and be like, well, I mean, it's hideous, but also like, what's that? You know? And that's, I have to imagine that's part of what the elders see in her, is the fact that she's like, no, I want to know, like, what is that though? Where other people are cringing away or recoiling, like without even being in control of that. She's waiting for more and irritated when she doesn't get it. And it's really just unrelatable. That's what it comes down to for me. It could not be me, and I don't get it. So they get to this temple made of almost pure gold. The temple was blocky and fluid at the same time, like some architect had tried to build a rearing snake out of bricks. It was adorned by dangling flags of every color, on which were written words she didn't understand. And this comes up later, that they are speaking another language, and once again it's mentioned how the emperor standardized language, and that people were punished for not speaking correctly, or if they had too strong of an accent still, they were punished for not completely integrating. And at the time, I just put down, like when this was mentioned by Shara, that he had standardized language, I saw it as something that he did as a boon for the people to make it easier for everyone to communicate. But the perspective here feels a lot more like the emperor was aware of the ways that people could communicate with the elders, or things that could be said to trigger the elders coming back. And he was like, so what we're not going to do is ever use that fucking language again. And that sounds like it's really similar to the concept of like the colonizers coming to the United States and telling Native Americans that they weren't allowed to speak their languages, but except if the Native American languages were actually linked to like truly dangerous, treacherous gods kind of thing. And it never really occurred to me that there was like a safety reason why he would have standardized language, but now I'm feeling like kind of an idiot that didn't occur to me at all. I'm a sweet summer child occasionally. So she's thinking to herself about how she's hoping one of the people here is a soulbound, and I'm just like, oh boy. And initially, when she gets dropped into this vision, she panics, and then she has to stop and she says, it's like watching a play. I'll sit back and enjoy the show just like they always say. Put that way, she could think of this like a holiday. No play had ever created such a vivid picture as this one, and maybe she'd get to see something that even her father had never seen. So again, just her ability to compartmentalize is remarkable. And like, it's not as unusual as I might think. I believe like kids can be really detached from things because they don't have a lot of meaning to you as a kid. You know, like hearing that like some character is going to get put in a pot and eaten as an adult has a kind of horror element to it because we can extrapolate so much about what that really means. But as a kid, when somebody's like, oh, and she was going to put her in a pot and eat her, that's just fairy tale stuff. It doesn't have that sort of like accompanying context. And you just go, oh, yeah, of course that's what they're going to do. They're a witch, and that's what witches do. And it's just completely roll with it, you know? So I'm kind of wondering if that's what's going on here with Jyrene right now, is that all of this feels so separate from reality that she isn't as afraid as she should be because she doesn't have the context and doesn't really understand what potentially could happen here. She's never been, I mean, you know, when we see the way that things go on the island when they help her escape, there's a real sense of this is new to her, like being in this kind of direct danger in relation to the elders themselves. Nakothi's aura feels like something that she can vaguely recognize, but she's never been in its path before. So anyway, what I'm saying is, when you're young, you're dumb. It's just an unavoidable fact. It's not to say that, like, you can't be really perceptive about some things. Kids can be a lot smarter than we give them credit for. But there are also things that we assume are going to be frightening to children that are only frightening if you can grasp the big picture. And children aren't really equipped for that. I can't believe these people are calling me back. I'm sorry. One moment, and let me just set my do not disturb. It's Navient, guys. My student loan people, which should surprise nobody. A bitch is late because she is broke, hence trying to get new patrons. Mention Unspoiled and some channels, everybody, and some different servers and whatnot if you can. So anyway, she winds up in this place at one point. This was the part where I was really like, what are you, Jyrene? This first one is this worm. She's wanting to see its face, and the scene moves before she can, like, actually get to see it, and she's annoyed. And then she's floating above a field of flowers. And under the flowers is not grass, but liquid. Like, they're floating like lilies and lily pads. And the liquid is red and smells like copper. And it just says, she wondered if it was a sea of blood. It doesn't say, with a dawning sense of horror, Jyrene realized it was blood. No, it does not. It's just, I wonder if that's blood. So matter of fact. I found it very unnerving. I don't know about y'all, but it just... I just need her to go do something normal. Go to the mall. Be a teenager. So then all of a sudden she's out in the void. Painted darkness enfolded her, an infinite void filled with swirls of distant colors that shivered and danced. It was like drowning in an ocean of stars, if the stars were dyed like quick lamps for a festival. And again, we have seen people look into this void, have some contact with this void, and be absolutely shaken by it to their core, feeling in the kind of danger that you get in a nightmare, pulling away, recoiling. And she has none of that reaction at all. Not even, there's no fear. There's nothing. And there's this voice that says, what would you ask for given the chance? Can you make it go back? I want to see the first one with the giant worm. Would you allow me to see the rest of it, please? Why? I wanted to see its face. The voice murmured something else, something she didn't catch, and then even that vision ended. It didn't cut off instantly, as the other scenes had, but slid down her eyes like paint washed away by the rain. So, this voice is asking her for a wish. And the wish is, I want to see the face of that elder. And honestly, it felt like a huge waste to me. I don't know if she didn't realize the scope of what this voice was asking her when it said, you know, basically, what would you wish for? But it felt like she was just giving an immediate response based on what, in that very moment, she wanted. And if somebody had said, I can grant you one wish, and it was a different context, I don't know if she would have made the same choice. And whether or not she truly grasped it and made kind of an impulsive choice, or she did grasp it and that was simply what she wanted, it gets the result of a stone that is formed out of this void as a gift to her cult. And they sit there for ages deciding what to do with it. It's almost like an hour in the end. And her father tries to reach out for it, and it flashes away in front of her face. And then the voice tells the elders, you look back, she looks forward. She will guide you into the future. Bind this to her soul. And her father is almost like on the edge of laughter, which I'm really interested in because it feels like that's him going, yeah, I kind of thought that this might happen. Which, why did he think that? You know, and we also find out like Jyrene's mother didn't want her to come to this. So her mom is aware that some shit's up here. And later on, we see her like talking with some of these people older, and she's in the midst of dealing with everything with Calder and getting them convinced that they need him and that she shouldn't, you know, basically use him as bait or just take him off the table as a player. But I'm really interested in the fact that her father had the confidence to be like, no, she definitely should come and see this. And her mother didn't. Does her father know something about her resilience that her mother doesn't? Does her mother know more about how terrifying the elders can be, or like feel that more acutely than her dad? Like, why? And in the end, he comes over to her and tells her, the most I can say is you're going to be very important someday, Jerry. And then we go to the next chapter. And we start with Calder climbing up onto the deck and immediately getting approached by Foster, who says, she's loose. And to make a long story short of this, she gets the drop on Calder, gets him to agree to bring her back to the island in exchange for no harm coming to him, just being questioned, and being questioned gently is the way that she phrases it. He agrees, immediately tries to get her bound in ropes again. It does not work because she is that fucking fast, which he really underestimated her so completely. And Foster is standing there like, sir, she killed Urziah. Why do you think that you are going to be able to get the drop on her in return? You know what she can do. And Calder's like all bitter about the fact that Foster didn't remind him of this sooner, despite the fact that Foster tried repeatedly to get him to listen and he simply wouldn't. So she takes him down again with a needle that has like a paralyzing agent on it somewhere. And then he hears Bliss's voice. And I really need to mention right here that he summons the elder that is like attached to his ship, Liatheton, and from his angle lying on his side, he could just see the Liatheton's chest and elbow, but he still felt its intent. It had stopped as soon as he was incapacitated, and Calder wasn't sure whether that came from concern for his well-being or a cruel sense of humor. A strange intent crawled up the chains, in addition to the elder's usual distant calculations and slow rage. It was now feeling something new, something almost like amusement. The Liatheton opened its mouth, though Calder could only see its lower jaw, and let out a hissing laugh. I cannot get enough of this. And later on, he asks it for help again, and it basically does a like, look, bud, best I can do is sit here and wait for you to die so that I'm released from my service here. And eventually he's like, you better fucking do what I said. And he draws some like real intent into that. And it does what he says, but it takes that extra push of effort and makes Liatheton even crankier, if anything. So this is when Andal says, the Eternal will have seen the Liatheton. They're only minutes out. We intended to follow them to the capital, but now that they've seen something's wrong, I'm sure they will send someone over. Calder hadn't thought of using the Liathatan as a signal, but he appreciated the results. When he discussed this with Andal in the future, he would pretend this was his plan all along. I love this so much. He's just like, good job. That's Andal's explanation to Maya, but because Calder, reminder, is paralyzed. But he's still out here trying to be opportunistic and make himself look like he's omnipotent. And she asks who's on board the Eternal, and he says 3 guild heads, and she actually growls. And this is when Bliss turns up. And Calder really thinks that she's going to, free him immediately or help him. And it turns out that it's not exactly that she and Maya are on the same side in any way. It's simply that Bliss isn't entirely happy with Calder, and there isn't anything physically, there's no risk of him dying from the poison he's been administered, so she doesn't really see a reason to do anything about that at the moment, which I can understand. And she walks up to Maya and says, you look strange. Do you know Nathaniel Barrius? I've never met him, but I'm familiar with his handiwork. Maya's hand flexed, stretching further. We need Calder Martin. We've all agreed, but I don't know what I should do with you. You're not supposed to be here, you know. Bliss was cut off when Maya launched herself explosively across the deck. And again, summarizing, Bliss is too fast for Maya, which does not happen. And Calder is just kind of like, good God. I see now. They've given you some supplementary systems. That's very sad for you. How do you deal with the voices? And Maya says, you're an artificial. I'd heard the rumors, but I never checked your file. The consultant's face reddened and her shoulders trembled with palpable rage, but her expression remained focused and her knife steady. The combination made her seem much less human, giving the impression that her body was shaking without her, like her flesh bore an anger that her mind could not touch. And I really liked this description because it's a hard thing to picture, for sure, and I'm not sure I really can because it's an unfamiliar, Nevertheless, though, that sounds wrong. And trying to make it somebody who mostly looks like a person, trying to remind the reader that they are very much not quite human anymore is a difficult thing to get across sometimes. And I feel like I've read a lot of fantasy and stuff dealing with all kinds of different creatures, and a lot of them are very humanoid. And then there's moments where the main character will be like, all of a sudden he didn't look human. And it's really, it's a very abstract thing to try and express. But this specificity in the disconnect between what's happening with her body and what's happening with her face and voice is just really helpful in being like, okay, that is the kind of weird that you don't even really see in animals, because so much of the whole thing with he didn't seem human, he seemed more animal than man. That's often the comparison. And we have not for nothing, but we have made our animals and pets into people in such a way that I don't even feel like that's an effective comparison anymore. So I just liked that. That really made me stop and go, oh yeah, that sounds weird. So Maya says, I need transportation back. Give me control of the ship for 2 days and we can go our separate ways. Bliss squinted. You're suggesting that you will kill Calder Martin if I don't comply. You could, I suppose. It would take me a moment to reach you, and he's very close. And she then begins to list, you could step on his neck from there, or drive your dagger into his brain, or tear his head off, or kick him and break his spine, or crush his skull, or poison him, or constrict his windpipe. Calder wasn't sure what Bliss intended, but he wished he could ask her to stop. That would be inconvenient for me, and I suspect Calder Martin wouldn't like it much either. And where would he find another emperor at this hour? And this is the first time that Maya is finding out that that's what they intend for him. And Calder is like, motherfucker. If they didn't know that, they would already have wanted to kill me, but it wouldn't be as personal. Now, like, there's just no way. Why are you spilling this information? So he manages, as this stuff is wearing off, to turn himself over a little bit. And he can see Maya's shoe and Andal on the other side. I love that this says, he had stayed completely silent during the entire exchange, Calder noted, but at least he had the decency to look concerned. And there is something about that I really think Calder's... he expects that Andal is less, like, willing to give him up in a way than I think maybe Andal is. I don't know. I suspect Andal of having a kind of brutal practicality to him. We don't know a lot about him, but, you know, we'll see maybe. So, this is when the Eternal is, like, right near him. And then, all of a sudden, there's this moment where he sees this motion, and the ship itself is red, and its sails are crimson. So, it's got a really distinct look. As he stared, that spot of scarlet began to twist, warped as though by heat. The air shifted in a visible spiral, forming into a bubble of distorted space that engulfed half the ship. And then the bubble pops, and it tears the ship in half. And he winds up, like, holding it together physically with his abilities. But it is quite a moment. Like, when I was listening, I just went, oh shit, out loud. And then we jump back to 11 years ago with Jyrene and the conversation that she's having into the fire when she's defending Calder. He carries a bellowing horror, a spawn of Othagor that often declares death, but Calder treats it as a beloved pet. And he was exiled from the Black Watch for consorting with elders, which is not exactly what happened, but she's doing what she can to phrase things. And then later on, he has the approval of Kellerak. And all of these, like, there is this person that she's speaking to, person being used very loosely, and there are other people as well that they have to consult with. And this moment where it's kind of self-correcting. If the former Black Watch has a connection to the Great Ones, he could be our greatest step forward in an instant. The voice layered over itself as though correcting itself while speaking. A moment, it stuttered again. A year, an age, a day, a century. That must be really wild. May I introduce him to the Sleepless? We must proceed carefully. Our old enemy is still in control of himself, and we cannot afford his interference. We must seek guidance. And by their old enemy, they mean the Emperor. And she realizes not even saying his name out loud is allowed here, really. At one point, when they're transmitting, one of them mentions needing to talk to a great elder, and just that mention makes things kind of fizzle for a second. And they say, we're going to go and find out what Akhmagut thinks. And she's like, I just told you he had Kellerak's approval, and Kellerak's fucking around. Akhmagut's dead. And the voice responds, you know that doesn't really matter, right? So then we go into chapter 4. That was, Jyrene's thing here was a whole chapter. It's really short. So chapter 4 is Calder dealing with what's happened on the ship, in as much as he can, because, reminder, he has been paralyzed and things aren't great for him. So he uses the Elder to save them. And this is when he really, like, forces it and is like, I am going to make you do the thing. Cheska, the guild head, is on that ship, and she is his friend, and she, he's already lost somebody pretty recently in the span of the actual times of this book. And he's like, yeah, I'm not going to go through that again. The 6-fingered handprint on his arm grew warm. Save them, he ordered, and the Leathaton shook with an emotion even stranger than amusement. Shock. It was still not a perfect approximation of the emotion, but it was shock nonetheless. I obey, the Leathaton sent back, and the simple intent was layered with meaning. It submitted with reluctance, resentment, curiosity, calculation, and smoldering rage. But it does obey. The testament creaked as the elder forcibly towed it closer to the navigator's vessel. And that shit is not the direction that ships are meant to move, and it causes some damage. And he thinks to himself, well, I'm going to have to get some materials later to handle this, because yikes. And Mayat thinks Calder might have done this. And he says, not me. And she goes a little pale when she realizes that. I am wondering what she thought he was doing. If he had, damaged it, what did she think his play was there? Because they're on his side, clearly. But, otherwise, what would you think had happened, I suppose, So Bliss watches the sky and says, it's coming again. Secure all hands. And this is when Maya says, who controls the Optasia? And Bliss says, I thought no one did. But that's clearly not true, is it? And reminder, throughout all of this, Calder doesn't know what the Optasia even is. So they wind up having to give him some info later that we as readers from reading the previous book already have, but people read these in different orders. So, this might be the first of this information that some readers were getting about the Optasia. And let's see, this close, it looked like a soap bubble, a transparent sphere of energy that warped and twisted everything seen through it. If he hadn't dragged the ship to the side, an explosion like the one that had destroyed the Eternal would have uprooted his mast. It wouldn't have been a lethal blow, but a crippling one. Calder would have to rely on the Leathaton to take them anywhere, which was not a winning proposition over the long term. So she asks, how is this possible? And Bliss says, something or someone has taken control of the palace, so therefore my watchman posted there must be dead. I must immediately return to the capital because that is my job, and I'll be taking Calder with me. He is now a very valuable replacement part. And the fact that she calls him a replacement part is just one of the many little insults that are, I want to say she's inadvertently insulting him, but I don't even know if that's true, because that implies a sort of delicacy that she's having about the situation that I am not 100% confident on. So yeah. Anyway, it reaches under and lifts up the hull, the Leathaton. Water poured out of the shattered vessel, the deck stabilized, and survivors in the water swam away from the monster in renewed panic. Most of them paddled desperately for the testament, trying to escape the rise of the giant elder. I'm not mad at that. That seems 100% reasonable, logical, and fair. Cheska, captain of the Eternal, had a nasty cut over one eye. Her breathing was shallow, and she didn't look likely to wake any time soon. Her red hair hung messy and limp against her back, and she shuddered and twisted in an uneasy sleep. Petals was currently fussing over her, carefully lowering a glowing syringe to the woman's throat. And I'm really curious because there is something about this that feels... he phrases it like surviving a shipwreck takes the wind from your sails, so to speak. I am not really thinking that's what caused this, but I don't know. Let's see. The crew members were in varying states of panic or insensibility. Only Jerilis Teach seemed to have her wits about her, and she was still visibly exhausted and soaking wet. Her blue eyes were haunted and weak, a far cry from their usual cold iron stare. She even shook slightly within her black and red plate armor. By now, the screams of her wind watcher had gone silent. Calder's crew took care of the survivors, but Calder himself kept his mind focused on the ship. The Laphaton strode through the water ahead of them, carrying the remnants of the Eternal in its clawed hands. And he is just focusing on holding this ship together as it walks, because like the way that it's pulling is, again, it's not natural. This isn't how ships are supposed to be stressed. And it said he would have had an easier time if he could have left the remaining half of the Eternal behind, but he knew what that would do to Cheska. A captain's ship is his life. A navigator's ship is his soul. That had once been a common saying, though the origin was long lost. And I am wondering about her, whether she's like soulbound to it, and the fact that this has happened to it might be like part of what's causing her reaction, perhaps. Because Shara, when she gets Cyphrin initially, like, it looks like it's destroyed. She's in bad fucking shape from that. And it takes a while for her to recover. And part of it, I think, is having a weapon to replace it. So I'm very curious whether or not whatever, like, inhabited the ship that allowed it to bind to Cheska might have been damaged by whatever was just done. Because, I mean, if you're sitting on the Optasia, you would have the capability to do that, I'm assuming. If you are capable of using it at all, I would think that you would be able to really wreak some havoc on soulbound vessels. So Bliss makes her way over to Calder in this really weird way. The Black Watch head slid from cask to crate to giant basket, weaving her way across the crowded deck like a child taking a game very seriously. When her head rose from inside a box next to him, he had no idea how she'd managed to get inside the box without him seeing, but he'd learned to stop asking pointless questions. He nodded to her. I don't know why this cracks me up so bad. Bliss popped up from behind a cask like a prairie dog, glanced around, and slowly hid herself again. How does he make her so amusing and yet so unsettling? She's so hilarious, and yet you're also like, ooh, yikes, though. So she comes over, asks him what's going on. He's wrapped in a blanket, and he's drinking this, like, potion that is supposed to help with the paralysis drug. And it's making him feel like the world's upside down a little bit, which I'll tell you what, when I was reading this the first time, I was in the grips of the start of a pretty bad migraine. And all I could think was, oh, God, sorry, bud. Because when you have a migraine, depending on your symptoms, it can feel like things are moving and shifting around you in a way that's really awful and can make you feel almost seasick. And it just, I was like feeling a lot of solidarity with him on that. So she's like, are you sick? And he's like, I'm recovering from poison. And she says, oh, I just noticed that a lot of times people wrap blankets around the injured and sick. Does that help? And he says, at least I won't be tired, shaky, and cold. She rubbed her chin as she considered. I see. I'll remember that. And there's something that I believe her. I feel like we're going to see her get somebody a blanket before the end of this book, and I am 100% into it. So he asks who attacked them. And she just basically is like, good question. I don't know. And then just says, you know how difficult it would be for a human to use the Optasia. And he's like, I don't. No, I don't. I don't even know what that is. what are you talking about? How, so she explains it all and how like dangerous it is. And he thinks for a moment that maybe the aptasia was what made the Emperor seem so impressive, and that it was like a sort of average power that had been enhanced by this construction. And then very quickly is like, yeah, no, that's fucking not true at all. Calder had read enough of the Emperor's trail to know the man invested objects just by walking down the same street. An intent like that couldn't be faked. But then Calder would never thought such an intent could be magnified either. How does it work? What did he use it for? So yeah, explains about, long distance dealing with problems and the fact that he hasn't been using it a lot recently. The last 20 years, she thinks he's only used it one time because it's eating away at him. And Calder's like, if it ate away at the Emperor, what do you want me to use it for? Because I might just fucking ruin the world. Is basically what he says. Don't worry. We know you can't force Ergnat back into his seal or keep Akhmagut from rebuilding his library or do anything useful. We need eyes. Through the aptasia, even when the Emperor couldn't confront a threat directly, he could tell us what was happening with any of the Great Elders at any time. On our own, we can't keep track of it at all. And you'll be able to send messages to our agents anywhere in the world. We'll deal with all the real threats as long as you keep us informed. And, of course, the others want a figurehead to keep the people happy. A puppet. A pretty doll to put on parade so the children feel protective. Are you insulting me on purpose? That's ridiculous. He says now he was sure Bliss was trying something. I am very compelled because I can't imagine what that was. When she says don't be ridiculous, I get this, and I'm realizing as I say it that I don't have any evidence for it, but I'm going to say it. I get the sense Bliss doesn't lie. I really, I don't feel like we've ever seen her lie. She's said shit we don't understand. She's been a weirdo. But straight up saying a thing that isn't true, I am not sure we've ever seen from her. And I don't really feel like it would be her thing. So when she says that's ridiculous, my instinct is to say that then that isn't what she was doing. Then it is ridiculous and that's not... But if that isn't what she was trying, I can't imagine what was, because it was very much like... And it was just, yeah, I don't know what to make of that otherwise. And it says his only asset, it seemed, was being disposable. He could use that. When we reach the capital, what's the plan? You clear the way to the aptasia and I sit on it, then everything is better again? That depends on one very troubling factor. What's that? Who's using it now? And this is the thing that... So, we go to Jerry here. Jerry's hand hovered inches away from the throbbing gray-green flesh that walled her inside the room. The bulbous meat that enveloped the walls would have been disgusting if she hadn't been trained to look past its appearance and into what it represented. An advance in knowledge and technology so complete that humans might never understand it. Besides the elders, who had the power to instantly grow a life and then bend it to their will, even the Emperor couldn't do that. The elders controlled life and death, memory, knowledge, space, time. And she just essentially here waxes philosophical about how useful they are, how, small picture people are who can't understand, wanting to learn from them. And she says, how long must I wait? And it appears that Kellerak is here. A dark-skinned Heartlander man who might have been a native of the capital. It feels like that because of the eye thing. But is this just something that people in her cult do as a means of, like, paying homage? Is it homage? An homage is the object, and homage is the action, right? This is what comes of reading and not listening. But she'd seen other elder cults who believed in mutilating their bodies. It looked as though he'd driven steel screws straight into his own eyes. But this is him, though, right? She's not treating him the way I would expect, so it feels like she doesn't understand who he is. I don't know. If you wish to learn from the elders, patience is the first and most valuable skill. There are beings who will not begin a conversation without observing the other party for at least a year, and whose names take a man's lifetime to properly pronounce. So she says, I owe a debt to the Great One who freed me from captivity, not you. I owe you nothing. I do not know you, nor do I know what I'm doing here. And until I do, I'm afraid I can't cooperate. If it's your job to guide me as you claim, then I suggest you start doing so. Otherwise, well, I am a soulbound, and you are not. She doesn't know who he is. Because later on, he says, I can't be soulbound, I don't have a soul. And it doesn't, it takes a moment for her to start parsing what that means, but they get interrupted. The room shook. And she says that one was closer, and he's like, yeah, it definitely was. It had been 3 days since Jerry had been stuck in this room, though it was hard to tell the exact time without access to natural light. She remained surrounded by skin and muscle, as though she'd been swallowed by a great elder whale, food oozing through disgusting openings at regular intervals. Her transmission through the void had taken her directly here, and she'd waited in the dimness for instructions. Waited in vain so far. Yesterday, the blind man had appeared next to her, presumably through a void transmission similar to her own. It was he who explained exactly where they were. The center of the Imperial Palace, inside the Emperor's personal rooms. Now, question. Did Calder ask for Calder to save Jyrene at the end of the last book, and I forgot? I can't remember, because I feel like he makes some request. And it's been so long now that I don't remember. So that knowledge had distracted Jerry for hours as she explored the suite of flesh-covered rooms in a new light. And I am assuming that they were not flesh-covered, because that was never mentioned by Shara. So this is a new feature. And she's thinking about Calder and how poorly she handled everything, and realizes that it almost couldn't have gone any more wrong, and she just very poorly handled the situation. But she's also thinking about the fact that he fucking abandoned her in a cell, and is just like, I really, even with everything, wasn't expecting him to pull that. That's fucked up. Which, I mean, yeah, I wouldn't have been mad at him for deciding to just be like, you know what, fuck her. But I do understand, when you've spent that kind of time with somebody and you were hoping maybe they'll look past this little obsession I have with elders, that would be a real, slap in the face. So she keeps seeing, at this point, between the folds of its flesh, she caught a glimpse of silvery bars and wires, like an intricate cage of polished steel. Is this what they're after? And he replies, so even a blind pig can find a prize if it roots around long enough. Bliss might be out here insulting, but it's not that brutal. Ouch. So he says that he can tell she's not a reader, and she's kind of like, How is that possible? Because again, she doesn't know who he is. For a moment, an image of another place flicked in front of her eyes. It was so vivid that it swallowed all of her senses, and she smelled burnt wood, tasted the salt of the ocean, saw sunlight on waves, and so quick that she couldn't make out details. It was the vision of a reader, shared with her for a split second. "Did you see that?" she demanded. "I'm not permitted to. Safeguards." "What is that? Why do they want it?" "It is the key to the world. Almost obsolete now, but it has its uses. At the moment, it's bait." The room continued to shake as the enemies outside kept launching their attacks. No matter how she pleaded or demanded or threatened, her guide gave her no more answers. Which was fine, she eventually decided. If no one would tell her what she was supposed to do in this overgrown room, she would decide for herself. And she'd already decided what she would do. Burn her way out. Which, I don't feel like that's going to go super well for her because, again, she does not know who she is fucking with right now. But best of luck, I suppose. Thoughts and prayers. I really do not understand whether or not this is directly linked or... Because I'm going to go with... Oh, sorry. George replied to me, guys. Just one sec. He does not make a deal to save his wife and is offered a stronger connection to the Leviathan as an answer to all his problems and the sword as a freebie. Oh. So, but he is offered to save her and chooses not to do that, right? It was like an option for him. Is that how that worked? I feel like there was something in the conversation between him and Kellerak where Kellerak was kind of like, wow, you are more cold-blooded turning your back on her than I expected you would be. But I maybe should just go back and like reread that last chapter just to, refresh. But the fact that she is in here with Kellerak, I can't really understand what Kellerak, he's the one that she says the cult is most comfortable dealing with because he is the most sort of friendly to humans is too strong a word, but he's willing to work with humans in a way elders mostly are never even not really capable of, it doesn't seem. And the Akhmagut is the second of the ones that they feel they can perhaps work with, the most likely options, because he is an elder who wants knowledge above all else and doesn't explicitly seek the complete eradication of humanity. If the eradication of humanity were to result from his search for knowledge, then so be it. But it wouldn't be his actual goal, which to me feels so tenuous, but I guess go ahead. And so is he here because of the deal with her people, her cult? And why does he need her there with him to do this? Is it related to, because he says it's bait. Is Kellerak going to use her to try and force Calder into something? I feel like that's got to be part of it, right? The Optasia is going to be bait for people like Bliss who know what it is and give a shit about it. But then Calder, I don't feel like that's going to, they need something else. So maybe that's what this is. Ugh, I am not excited for it, though. Calder just keeps getting... Oh my god, you know what I just remembered, you guys? When Lucan goes on his mission, he mentions how it looks like there's pieces of an exploded creature, flesh chunks rotting and dotted all over the place. This blows up somehow, I guess. Oh, I'm excited now. George says, I think they talked about if he should save her or not. And then Kellerack said, yeah, I'd totally forget about her if I was you. Good choice for her good choice, fuck her, basically. But that's just my memory. Okay, cool. Well, thank you, George. So, yeah, that's where chapter 4 ends. I'm, like, kind of on time. Wild. And I'm not. I'm 6 minutes over. What am I talking about? But I'm really, really excited. It's always fun to read these after. I'm wondering if, like, part of why I've enjoyed the C books more also is I have the context of Shara's book already, so it feels richer. And maybe if I read Calder's book first, I would feel this way about the Shadow books, because that, you know, he is the foundation of this section, but then the next book feels that much more, like, dense because of it, you know? I don't know. So, all right. Thank you guys again very much for listening. And thank you to George for commissioning this. Really appreciate it. I'm getting to a point, guys, where a lot of the shows that I have had to keep space for and spoil me are ending. So I'm going to start having some spaces open. And if you're interested in commissioning something brand new, or if you would like to try a group thing with, like, other listeners to see who can support you in getting something commissioned, go into the Spoil Me channel on Discord, or you can send me an email and, you know, just share your idea and we'll figure out whether we can do it or not. I'm sorry, I'm going to wrap this with George's comment. I like the Shadow books more, but I just assumed that was because I read them first and hate men, LOL. You really know a way to sweet talk a girl, George. All right, guys, next time. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.